before all of that, Camilla and Matthew are here now to talk through some of the stories making the headlines. Welcome.
Morning.
Lovely to see you both. Let's begin, shall we, with
My house smells like a chippy, by the way. I've gone down
Your
the
house
vinegar
already
route.
smells like a
Yeah. I do the vinegar.
You
It's
clean the
clean,
vinegar?
but it smells.
But it works.
It works.
And it's eco-friendly.
Eco-friendly, cheap as chips. Smells like chips.
What do you have to say about that?
We did actually get some takeaway chips last night, so my house also smells like a chippy. And we had a pie. Had I have known that John was cooking pies, I could have got some tips.
Obviously,
What an
unusual start to our news review, eh?
There we go.
Yes, there we are. We all smell of chips. Wonderful.
Should we talk about the coronation
Yes,
instead,
let's.
shall we? King Charles III has reportedly officially invited the Duke and Duchess of Sussex to the coronation in spring. So this is a statement that's been released from Prince Harry and Meghan, and it said that they've been contacted. I can confirm the Duke has recently received email correspondence from His Majesty's office regarding the coronation. However, they refuse to be drawn into whether or not they would be attending.
Because perhaps they've got a vinegar chip on their shoulder. But it's interesting, this, isn't it? This idea that they have confirmed the invitation, but not that they're going. They have got a bit of a get-out-of-coronation free card in that May the 6th, when the main ceremony is Archie, their son's 4th birthday. So the general consensus is that he may come, but she probably won't. And I think in issuing the invitation, the royals have looked quite reasonable in light of Spare and all of the other revelations, because if they didn't invite him, I think they would court criticism for that.
Stops all the newspapers that are running the stories saying they weren't being invited to the wedding, running the stories that they weren't being invited to the wedding. So it gets the truth out there, whether they go, I suppose. I think it's interesting what you say. I mean, that would make, politically, I can see that making some sense. Harry comes and Meghan stays behind.
Like, journalistically, we're sort of doing our coronation planning, and there's either one narrative, if they don't go, which is just the coronation, the king and the queen consort and all of the other family. And then, journalistically, there's an entirely different narrative to follow if they go, if he just goes, what the chemistry's like between them, where they sit.
And is that something that the palace are going to want? Because that is a distraction from a very important day.
It is, although I suppose with the funeral and indeed the Platinum Jubilee, they were kind of a side order alongside the main royal event. Now, it's also a question of whether they want to be that themselves. They're going to be afforded this non-working status that is also reserved for the Duke of York. So then they're in the kind of Prince Andrew cheap seats of this entire event. Is that what they want? I think we also have to be prepared for the fact, and I'm not trying to say this to give people ideas, but the reception might be more negative than it was for the Platinum Jubilee and the Queen's funeral. Now Spare's come out. They don't want to be publicly booed.
When they just arrest those people, like they arrested all the ones that objected to the coronation in the first place, that seems the way, isn't it? You don't like the coronation, get arrested. Don't like Harry and Meghan, stand outside
that may be a
shout
debate.
at them.
The use of police powers and protests is a debate for another day.
Ultimately, they're a family. And like all families up and down the country, you have fallings out. People might say things you don't like. But still, on big moments within your life, we turn up for each other, don't we?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily if we've written a tell-all book about our nearest and dearest giving away their deepest, darkest secrets.
And not everyone gets a +1.
Not everyone gets a +1. I mean, it's interesting to see who's being invited. Don't forget, this whole event has been shrunk down from 8,000 back in 1953 to, I think, around 2,000 now. So there's all sorts of argy-bargy going on, by the way, with the various politicians and members of the House of Lords and who gets invited. Obviously, family is family, but at the same time, even at the weekend, I think we're moving on to this, you know, you've got Harry still banging on about childhood trauma and making suggestions that he didn't have.
I mean, this is. I just, you know, in a world where we had like free speech, it seems that every time this guy speaks, everyone says, "Oh, you can't say this, you shouldn't do that."
I don't think he shouldn't say it. I just think he
should.
shouldn't be complaining about invasion of his own privacy when he keeps on invading his own privacy. I'm quite happy for him to say it.
He feels that his privacy, as we keep going over, for years, decades, was invaded by people writing stories from insiders and sources that he has subsequently given his approach to, and it just seems perfectly reasonable.
There's been no invasion of privacy greater than Spare.
I've read Spare cover to cover, or got him to read it to me, actually, because I got the audio book, and virtually, as we said at the time, as he was reading it to me, in every single chapter, multiple times, there are mentions of his mother and the trauma. There is no question that as a young boy, he was utterly traumatised by the way that played out, and it has had a profound and continuing effect on him, which is why he says he's from a broken home.
I don't think anyone's questioning that.
That's my point, is there seems to be a wholesale lack of even an attempt to understand his position. It's simply he is outraged, that's wrong. And yet, in the minute you say that everyone's going to be concerned about whether it's Harry and Meghan there or Charles is there, I'm much more concerned about Prince Andrew's role. I'm really troubled by him. Harry and Meghan, they've made decisions, they've published their book. People can have an opinion about it.
It's not a mutually exclusive position to say that on one hand you feel very, very sorry for what he and his brother went through in the aftermath of their mother's death. And I lost my mother when I was young, so I understand where they're coming through. Yeah. You can hold that position, and you can also hold the position that he was wrong to have trashed his own family in an autobiography. They're not mutually exclusive positions.
As I say, he says in the book, actually, didn't he, that the Queen Consort was the source of some of the stories that trashed him. So if that was to be the case,
I think you two could probably argue about this all day long. The problem is there's sort of a real divide on which side you sit on with this.
On trauma, and I think, of course, we all have sympathy, but thankfully, he was loved by both his parents. Some people look at this and say, there are people out there that might have been brought up by a single mother in impoverished circumstances, and then she died, and that affected their life, you know, beyond all recognition. What we're talking about here is still a couple who have enjoyed immense privilege.
Privilege does not protect you from all manner of harm, dysfunction and pain.
Nobody says it does, but then
you're sort of inferring that it does.
No,
that
because people coming from, I think, quite a lot of the criticism around, oh, we've been evicted from Frogmore and, oh, we've had a difficult life, is from people who are saying, well, I share your pain because I've had a difficult life, but I didn't have the insulation of finances, privilege, a roof over my head, not having to worry about the mortgage. It seems disproportionate. There's a war on and there's a cost of living crisis going on.
So you mentioned Frogmore and you mentioned Prince Andrew. So Prince Andrew's appears to have got their house. Can you expect to maintain what is a beautiful and very large property in the UK if you don't live here anymore? No. So what is that? That's like a holiday home? And they've allegedly been offered apartments in Buckingham Palace. And we said this last week on here. There's a lot of space available. Yeah. There are loads of places that they could stay. They don't have to have the house.
No, I don't think there's much sympathy for a couple saying, oh, no, we've been evicted out of a house we don't even live in. While we're living in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Montecito. No, but also, actually, the King's got a problem on his hands here because he's talking about a slimmed-down monarchy and it being value for money. There is no way it's value for money to have all of these properties, half of which are empty most of the year.
And some of them occupied by people who've disgraced the royal family.
But there are discussions about furthering what they do with Buckingham Palace, which I think was the Queen's idea, to open that to the public. You get a chance to have a look at it, which is amazing, and earns a lot of money for the upkeep of the place. That if that was to be extended into other royal residences, then that begins to redress the balance. Yes,
but you've got a situation, for instance, just in Windsor alone. I wrote a story about this at the weekend, where you've got Windsor Castle's vacant at the moment. The Prince and Princess of Wales are in Adelaide Cottage. Frogmore's vacant, and that's currently being dealt with. There's the issue over Royal Lodge. There are other smaller properties. I mean, the Crown and, indeed, the Duchy of Cornwall and the Duchy of Lancaster owns a lot of properties, and they are royal residences that are owned kind of in trust for the public. There are private properties like Sandringham and Balmoral. But the point is, if he wants to look like he's being value for money, then people are going to start asking questions about why you need this vast portfolio.
Damn right.
Let's move on to a different story now. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who left office last September, has nominated Stanley Johnson, his father, for an honour. So it's quite interesting there because for those that don't know, Prime Ministers on their leaving, they get sort of a list of people that they could bestow honours onto, or at least put forward and nominate. David Cameron nominated 62, Theresa May nominated 60 people. It looks like Boris Johnson's list is a lot longer than that.
He's already done some of his family, hasn't he? Because Lord Johnson of South London somewhere, Joe, his brother Joe, got elevated to the House of Lords last time. The problem I've got with this is, has been published in many newspapers already, is that Stanley Johnson, I'm not entirely sure what he has done anyway to warrant a seat in the House of Lords other than being a former Prime Minister's dad, but he does have some serious allegations against him. Caroline Noakes, a former Tory frontbencher, says that Stanley Johnson smacked her on the bottom as hard as he can.
Legally, we have to say, he says he has no
recollection of who she is. So is actually what he says.
And we don't have him here to give his side of the story.
And there's also the Tom Bower book, relative, which relates to a story involving Boris's mum. And I think if you take those things into consideration, even in the mildest sense, and I think it's quite serious, the allegations, but then there is a grey area that is a cause for concern.
I just think it doesn't look great. It doesn't look great to have 100 people on the list anyway. I think most people look at it and say, come on, let's not have peerages for mates and relatives. Yeah. Let's strip it right down and get it down to at least below 50 would be my best recommendation, even lower. But second of all, I suppose you say, well, Stanley Johnson's been afforded quite a lot of different privileges because he is the father of a former Prime Minister and therefore does he need extra ones? I'm not sure.
OK, all right. Well, listen, pause there for a moment. In just